Welcome to our present state versus history on Speaker. Here we are focused on the current events of our culture through the principles of our history, trying to make sense of the culture and the mindset of today. I am your host, Ray Mayfield. Well, okay, folks, here we are back on the pod, working on these principles of freedom. I can't stress enough that we're going through the format of the principles that were put forth in a college course that has been put together by the National Center for Constitutional Studies. I'm not going verbatim down through their system, but I'm using, I guess to say, the outline of the principles. We're not going to hit everything just like they did. This is by no means something that's been put forth by them. I'm just using them as a reference material. That is a college course that they put out. It's called The Making of America, and part of that course is a book called The 500-Year Leap that I promote extensively. I think it ought to be standard reading. I've said multiple times in high schools. It's just a fabulous network of information from the historical accounts concerning our Constitution, okay? It's not set forth in a direction that's supposed to be specific for some religious institute or something like this. It's just a constitutional study. It's just really good source of information. Those folks has got a website, www.nccs.net. You can find their information there. Like I said, we're not affiliated in any way other than I bought this course years ago, and I've taught it and studied it extensively, and it's just a fabulous source of information, along with the bios from, I've mentioned before, I don't pronounce these men's names properly, and forgive me for that, but Walter Isaacson is one, Allison Scozen, Maxfield, Gordon Woods, the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers, and multitudes of other sources. The Encyclopedia Britannica, in fact, we're going to deal a little bit today. I got some information from them. I try to remember to throw those sources in there as we go through these podcasts, but this is just a compilement of my experiences and my information. I'm just trying to get it down in a simple form where simple folks like me can understand these things without all these six-cylinder words that they got in here and some of this stuff. The comprehension is there. It's just hard we get lost in some of these proper English and things, and I know that for people that have a hard time maintaining their focus on things like myself, sometimes it's distracting when you're going through all those different elements. So I'm just hoping to relate some of this factual historical information and get it across in a way that we can apply it to our lives in a realistic manner according to the way we live in everyday life. And that's the purpose for doing some of these interviews, getting some of these normal everyday folks that would come in. And speaking of that, I've arranged to do a phone interview. It'll be coming up in April. I have a dates and stuff set to actually do the phone interview, but it will be pre-recorded and then put out on these podcasts like all of them are. So it will be sometime after April the 12th that it'll be there for you to listen to with Miss Chris Ann Hall. And this is a gal that I met in about 2012. She is a constitutionalist and an attorney, and I'm not going to get into her bio and stuff right now. Those of you that know who I'm talking about, you know who she is. The LibertyFirstSociety.com is a website I'll throw out there with her, and I think it was about 2012 when I met her at Miami, Oklahoma. Actually, she came to speak, and I bought one of her books. I don't know if it's her first book or when it was in listing there, but it's called Liberty First, The Path to Restoring America. And I'm going to use part of a quote of hers in that book today, and she's agreed to do a 30-minute interview, and I think it's just most appropriate with these principles that we're going over, because We're of a kindred spirit here, and this is something she's been touring the country and teaching on for a long time, a lot longer than I have. She's one of the people who woke me up, I guess you could say, to the awareness of how things were going crazy. And like I said, we met back in 2012. Now, don't misunderstand me. We didn't sit down and have coffee, and we're not, bosom buddies or anything. We had a very brief encounter there, and I bought a book, and we spoke very briefly there. But the point is, she's been battling this battle quite some time, and through her career and lifelong journeys, and still is in Florida, actively pursuing the education of the people of this country to the right founding principles that this country is birthed on, and that is the battle here. And I know I'm rattling a long time here in the middle of introductory thing here, but this goes along with the Liberty pastors that are down in Texas that have moving, which that has birthed through. These things are starting to rise up. Dan Fisher and those folks down there with the Black Robe Regiment. I can go on and on about these organizations that are coming up out of the woodwork, you might say, and coming into a place where the information is out there, the accessibility to it is becoming more and more prevalent, to where, when I first started digging and hunting and looking in these things, it was a lot more difficult than it is today to compile some of this stuff together, because there's been some fabulous books written by some of these authors that I mentioned, like Woods. They've compiled this information together, and it's just history, folks. And there have been a lot of people out here that's put their whole life together to bring these sources to a centralized location, if you will, where it's a little easier for us to get traction on understanding the history of where we've been and some of these principles that these forefathers were basing the whole building of this nation upon. And we were talking about the morality or the role of religion, I guess, in the roles of government, where we concluded from the last podcast. We run out of time, and so I'm going to pick back up into some of that, and we'll probably get into the next principle, which is all things have been created by God, in the middle of this podcast as we go. And something else that I'm told I'm not doing a good enough job at is, we're available to come and speak if that's something you'd want to do. And those of you that are listening to this podcast, my wife and I, we're no longer actively pastoring church. God's changed things in our life. I won't get into all the details of the last 5 or 6 years. It's been like a complete upside down, coming out of a whirlwind of a tornado, and we're just kind of settling back into moving forward, and this podcast is one of those things that we're putting together. I worked today a little bit on trying to get some video things going, but I'm this technical computerized operating stuff is not my forte, and honestly I've not spent a whole lot of time trying to learn it, and it's a struggle without help, and we're trying to do all this on our own, so just bear with me. Hopefully someday we'll figure it out. We'll be able to get some video content going in here. I figured out how I can record separately on the video but I can't get the audio going in the video and make them separate, and it's way beyond my expertise. But anyway, I won't bore you with that. So anyhow, we get back into some of what we've got going. We were talking about the role of religion in the aspects of our government, and what the forefathers' ideal was for that role to be. And we talked about the Black Robe Regiment and how they were ministering from the pulpits and giving the colonists, if you will, the citizens of what was going to become the Americas, the moral right or the moral okay to take up arms and defend their property and their liberties. And so we talked about how that was an instrumental influence. And then there's a lot of folks that have twisted this separation of church and state around, and they've used it to basically silence the modern day church. And some of the quotes that they use is Mr. Jefferson. He wrote a letter in January 1 of 1802 to the Dansbury Baptist Association. And in that letter, he said to them that there was this great wall of separation between the government and the religious organizations, and they take that completely out of content and try to make that out like Jefferson's intent was that there would be absolutely no interaction between government and religion. And that's absolutely wrong. If you take the contents of that letter, and what was Mr. Jefferson dealing with was the Dansbury Baptist Association had petitioned the government to create a day of prayer, a national day of prayer and fasting. Boy, does that sound familiar? We got that National Day of Prayer and Fasting. And Thomas Jefferson said, no, he could not designate any federal holiday due to any religious entity, for there was a great wall of separation, because it was not of the government's authority to declare any such day. He was not saying that we could not have a national day of fasting and prayer. He was saying the federal government could not declare a day that day. Hello. Does that mean that we, the people, can say, you know what? Tomorrow is going to be a national day of fasting and prayer? Yes, absolutely we can. See, and this goes all the way into, they say, well, they took prayer out of the school. No, they did not. They took organized, mandated prayer from the school government agency. The school is a government agency because it is government funded. So therefore, they cannot say you must pray in any way, shape, or form. However, if you take up notion to pray, guess what? You have the right to express your religious views and your religious practice freely. It does not mean that everybody has to follow, but if they are all supposed to be religious folks, guess what they will do? Yep, there it is. But anyway, we have this misnomer in our nation today to where we are completely, should I say, taken in by the so-called separation clauses that actually had no bearing whatsoever on there. And Miss Chris Ann Hall's book, The Path to Restoring America, she's quoting I believe he was a Baptist, Virginia Virginia Baptist General Convention, a Baptist preacher named John Leland. John Leland, he said, every man must give account unto himself to God. Therefore, every man ought to be at liberty to serve God in that way that he can best reconcile it to his conscience. If government can answer for individuals at the day of judgment, let men be controlled by it in religious matters. Otherwise, let me be free. So the whole point there that he's making is just what we're talking about here. The government is not going to give account for the individual's relationship with God. The individual must stand and give account. And it goes back to those principles we were talking about earlier before, with whether or not man is in the accountability. Where was it here? The third point of religion. They said that the Creator holds mankind responsible for the way we treat each other. That was the third generic point, if you will, that they believed was right and righteous in order for us to stand before God as an aspect of religion that they said did no harm to any form of religion. And it also says all mankind will live beyond this life. In the next life, man is judged for their conduct in this life. So 5 and 3 are pretty much synonymous with each other in those principles of all religions operate in. And those things give no offense to any of them. You see, it goes back to that national religion we were talking about, or that national pride, we can call it, because the national patriotism of this country is very much hinging upon those principles of service towards a divine creator, which gets us into the next principle.